The problem with creating a truly out there culture for a species completely unrelated to humanity is that your audience is still human. They need to understand what you're writing. You have to translate the alien into something relatable. But let's say you can overcome that. Let's say you can make your readers believe in an entire civilization of mice, the way Redwall did for me as a child. Once you've got that buy-in, the real question is, how do you build a culture that actually fits the biology of your sapient species? That's what we're exploring today. How to create a fantastical culture that co-evolves with the biology of the species you've imagined. Welcome to another episode of Creating Fantastical Life from Just-in-Time Worldbuilding with your host, Marie Mullaney. In scientific terms, sentience generally means the capacity to feel and perceive, while sapience implies higher reasoning and self-awareness, the kind of cognition we associate with humans. But in fantasy and science fiction, the term sentient species usually just means intelligent, self-aware beings capable of symbolic thought, communication, and culture. So for this series, I'm using sentient in that broader speculative sense. Now, what actually makes a species sapient enough to build a society in our terms? Usually, we expect a mix of abilities before we're willing to call a creature capable of such thought. 1. A rich communication system, either a proto-language or a fully developed language. 2. Tool use or technology. And 3. Social learning, like picking up skills by watching others, or teaching, where knowledge is deliberately passed on to the next generation. And 4. Evidence of abstract or symbolic thought, like art, ritual, or symbolic behavior. In paleoanthropology, things like cave paintings and deliberate burials are seen as signs of symbolic thought, which are the cognitive hallmarks of modern humans. When we see those types of behavior, we start recognizing people in the archaeological record as, well, us. Now, in speculative fiction, you can get wonderfully weird with it. You can imagine non-human minds with totally different ways of thinking and still have them achieve sentience. Take octopi, for example. In reality, they're intelligent, but solitary. They don't have social learning, which is why we don't consider them sapient. But in Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Ruin, he imagines uplifted octopi, which we will talk about upliftment in a later episode in the series. And those octopi develop communication and intelligence, and they even struggle to connect with humans and spiders because their sensory experiences are so alien. So this is all very interesting. But why does this definition of the word sapient matter for your world? It matters because all of those markers of sapience, language, art, teaching, tools, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They evolve alongside the biology of the species in question. So in our world, sentience likely arises from evolutionary pressures that reward communication and brain power, whether that brain is in a primate, a bird, a cephalopod, or something completely alien. So if you want your species to be convincingly sapient, they have to demonstrate it through speech, signs, symbolic art, ritual, or whatever fits their biology. And once you've got that down, once you have a species that meets the criteria for sapience, the next question is, how does their culture arise from their biology? To unpack that, we're going to look at how language, tools, and rituals evolved in our world and how you can apply those patterns to your fantasy world building. One of humanity's defining traits is the co-evolution of our biology and culture, especially through language, tool use, and ritual. Anthropologists believe that these capacities reinforced each other as we evolved through our various biological phases. Early hominins started using simple tools over 3 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens was even a sparkle in the first great ape's eye. Now, that tool use likely developed alongside growing cognitive and social skills. There's a long-standing hypothesis that gesture and tool use help pave the way for language by activating similar parts of the brain. Making a stone hand axe, for instance, requires foresight, fine motor skills, and probably teaching from one generation to the next. All of that involves complex cognition, the same kind of thinking language relies on: sequential processing, learning from others, abstract planning. Some scientists even argue that speech itself may have co-evolved with tool use. Our anatomy, like breath control and vocal cords, may have been selected for if it helped with group coordination during hunts or when teaching how to make tools. If Ugg can shout instructions to his buddies while hunting wild horses, his group does better, and he gets to pass on his genes. If Agina is great at explaining how to knap flint axes, she boosts the survival of her group and her own children. Communication becomes a survival advantage. Okay, so tool use and complex hunts reinforce the need for language, which drives the evolution of language. Now, when we look at the archaeological record, we see something very interesting. As tools become more complex, so does culture. Around 50,000 to 100,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic, humans saw a burst of innovation, diverse tools, cave paintings, ornamentation. And that is probably not a coincidence. That explosion hints that once communication crossed a certain threshold, when proto-language became full language, ideas could be shared and built on. And that's what we call cumulative culture. Culture that stacks one generation's knowledge on the next rather than starting from scratch every time. I've made a few videos on these topics: the Stone Age, cave paintings, the evolution of writing, and so on. And I'll link them in information cards or down below if I run out of cards. YouTube limits you to 5 cards. Anyway, cumulative culture is a game changer. Unlike other animals, humans didn't need to reinvent the wheel. We could learn from our ancestors through language or imitation. This created a feedback loop. Better communication led to better tools, which created more need for communication. And that's part of what propelled Homo sapiens into such a unique niche. Now, of course, this is all theory. We can't find fossils of the language, embedded somewhere in a cave. I mean, it is what it is, right? But we can infer communication by looking at tool complexity, signs of social living, and symbolic behavior. And based on that, it looks like humans were communicating pretty extensively at least 50,000 and probably closer to 100,000 years ago, and maybe even earlier. So, what does that mean for your world building? When you're designing a sentient species and its culture, ask, how do they communicate? As they evolve towards sapience, towards language, teaching, and culture, how did that process shape their biology, and vice versa? Bear in mind, your language doesn't have to be anything like a human one. Let's go weird for a moment. Okay? Imagine a species of intelligent trees that communicates entirely through chemicals. They evolved to release pheromones, maybe originally just to attract pollinating insects. Over time, they begin to communicate with each other with these chemicals, and they learned that if they coordinate their release, they could attract more pollinators, or they could warn each other about incoming predators. And bit by bit, they develop a chemical vocabulary. And in this case, the grammar might be based on how chemicals interact. Maybe some don't mix well, they separate in the air, and those become punctuation marks that end sentences and so on. Maybe the intensity or order of release changes meaning. Perhaps they grow different kinds of blooms or leaves to release different kinds of chemicals. Now, I'm not a chemist, so I'll admit this is completely speculative on my part. I have no idea if you could do that with chemistry. But you get the idea. Their communication system would reflect how they evolved. One caveat here, no matter how cool or alien your species is, your reader is human, or your player if you're a games master. So if you're writing a story about a civilization of trees, you still need to translate their communication into something humans can understand in tone, structure, and metaphor. But from a creative aspect, you can go wild. Language is a game changer, and thinking about how it evolves with your species opens up amazing world-building possibilities, whether you're working with trees, octopi, spiders, or something stranger still. Okay, next, we're going to talk about ritual, which is a critical part of social evolution and something that often gets overlooked in speculative species design. Before we get into ritual, I'd just like to invite you to sign up for my newsletter. It's 100% free, it comes out 4 times a year, and is prop full of interesting world-building thoughts as well as updates about my work. In the last newsletter, for example, I answered a question from a subscriber about the symbolic role of dragons in fantasy writing. And in the first newsletter I sent out this year, I wrote a long article about the importance of ritual and how you can use it in a fantasy world. So, if you enjoy my YouTube videos, you'll enjoy my newsletter. Sign up on the link down below. Okay, and now, back to the show. Rituals, from simple rhythmic dances to elaborate ceremonies, literally emerged because early humans needed a way to keep their social groups glued together. Now, I've talked about rituals and social cohesion before, links to those videos down below. But before we get into rituals, let's understand the importance of bonding in a social species. For any social species to work, for a group of individuals to work together, they need to establish social bonds. In primate societies, grooming is used to bond individuals, but grooming is one-on-one and it takes time. As human groups grew larger, that just wasn't practical anymore. You can't spend all day picking nits off 50 people. No one would get any work done. So we needed something new. We needed group bonds. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar proposed that laughter was one of our earliest tools for bonding at a distance. He reckons that laughter is like vocal grooming. It's contagious, it releases endorphins, and it builds trusts. Basically, it's social glue that scales up. Side note, doesn't that make it just sad how much anger is used in social media to drive behavior? Anyway, as groups got even bigger, music and dance probably took over that role. Drumming together, moving in sync, singing in the same rhythm, these behaviors bond dozens of people at once. Over time, they likely evolved into rituals and eventually religious ceremonies. These shared symbolic practices helped form strong group identities and encouraged cooperation in larger and more complex communities. Dunbar's research suggests a kind of cultural ladder, if you will. First came laughter, then came rhythmic music and dance, then came structured ritual, and from that came religion, all co-evolving with our increasingly social groups, our increasingly large groups, and building cohesion. In other words, rituals evolved because they helped us hold together larger groups. And that's essential for any non-solitary species. And let's just briefly rabbit hole and talk about the problem with solitary species. Let's say you create dragons in some kind of classical sense, where they're big and powerful and magically competent and totally solitary. That's fine as a biological species or a mythological species, but it's hard to build an engaging story around solo creatures with no social bonds or cultural structure. How is your reader, who is a social creature, supposed to relate to a completely solitary creature? What makes for better storytelling is when your species has some form of community. And that brings us back to ritual, because ritual is how you hold your fictional community together. But this isn't to say that solitary creatures can't exhibit complex behaviors. Just look at the documentary My Octopus Teacher. It beautifully showcases the intelligence and emotional depth of a solitary octopus. But notice how the story still centers around the human narrator. As fascinating as the octopus is, it's not a creature with culture in the way we understand it. Its solitude limits the kind of social bonding, teaching, or ritual behavior that makes a society. And that's what makes it hard for us, as deeply social beings, to fully relate to. So in fantasy, you can absolutely create solitary but intelligent creatures, but they're very hard to build compelling cultures or stories around. Okay, out the rabbit hole, and let's get back to the evolution of ritual. Ritual also has a survival angle to consider. Ritual burials, even if driven by grief, help dispose of bodies and prevent disease. A pre-hunt dance ritual boosts coordination and morale, and that increases the chance of success, and so on. So even beyond social bonding, rituals provide real evolutionary advantages, and groups that adopt them may have simply outcompeted those that didn't. And that leads to selection for ritualistic behavior, and voila, you get humans who love rituals. Or elves, or spacefaring insectoids who chant in bioluminescent patterns, whatever. You get creatures that love rituals. So by the time we reach early civilizations, every human society has some form of language, tool making, and ritual or religion. Or religion, note the or please. That trio is fundamental to any sapient species, and it should be fundamental to yours too. So when building your alien or fantastical species, don't just ask, do they speak? Do they use tools? Also ask, do they have rituals? What form does their symbolic expression take? How do they bind their tribes, their societies, their empires together? Because without those cultural bonds, there's no civilization. And without civilization, there's very little for your audience to connect to. Bear in mind that speculative fiction often explores alternative evolutionary paths for these traits. If we look again at Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, this is an uplifted civilization of spiders that develops language not through speech but through touch and vibration. They drum on web strands to convey meaning. Their tools aren't made of metal and fire. Instead, they domesticate ants to act as living machinery and to construct structures from silk. Even their rituals evolve. They form religious practices centered on their creator figure, the uploaded human mind of Dr. Avrana Kern. So you've got communication, technology, and shared belief all co-evolving, just like in the real world human development, but in a very different way that fits that species' biological shape and form. Or take the Poshendi, the singers from Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. They communicate emotion and intent through the rhythms, vibrations only they can hear, giving them expressive nuance far beyond human speech. And their magical bonds with friends are performed through ritual, showing again how language and technology, in this case magical technology, and social practices are all intertwined in their culture. If we look at my little example of the sentient tree species, it's the same thing here. Intelligent trees who use chemical signals to communicate and domesticate insects as tools. That's a civilization built from a totally different biology, but still following the same basic pattern, and they would over time develop rituals. And that's the point. Sentience isn't just about having a big brain or having a humanoid body or anything like that. In order to make a sentient, fantastical species feel real, what you need is communication, tools, be they magical or biological or whatever, and the social cohesion in ritual, and all of it needs to fit the species' biology. Any species that reaches the level of civilization we have now will likely have a language, spoken, signed, vibrated, chemical, magical, or whatever. They'll have tools or technology, whether that's fire, magic, bioengineering, or living machines. And they will probably have some kind of ritual or tradition, not necessarily religion, but something that binds them together and builds social cohesion. And to me, that is the key takeaway for today. When you're building your own cultures, ask how do they speak and why do they speak that way? What about their biology works with that speech? What tools do they use and how do those tools evolve alongside them? What rituals or symbolic practices do they engage in to hold their society together? What rituals have you created for your own speculative species? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video interesting but don't have a ritual, leave a pen emoji in the comments so I know that you made it this far. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe, because in the next episode of this series, we will be diving into multi-species civilizations and diplomacies. So how to build worlds populated by many sapient species, and how their relationship shapes your setting. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And a huge thank you to all of my channel members who make videos like this possible by providing financial stability to my income. Especially the just-in-timers of the Stone tier, Tony Lamana, Katie Kofi Mug, Epic, Necromancer JM, A. Wellyard, and Neil Buckley. And also to the just-in-timers of wood and straw levels on the screen now. If you would like to support the channel, the easiest and free way to do so is just to watch another video. If you like this video, you will probably enjoy my video on social cohesion and fading empires, which you can check out right here, or whatever the algorithm recommends for you over there. And I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time World Building.